We now turn to some concepts in metaphysics, not in any particular order, and not in even alphabetical order. The first is Ontological Kant, and this of course involves ontology, and ontos translates as thing, but of course I translate it as stuff. Now an ontological kind is a fundamental type of entity. It is not like a general kind of thing like, cats or kiwis, the fruit and the bird, or rocks or planets, but a metaphysical fundamental type. So it'd be something like material substance or time or space. And as you might imagine, a lot of metaphysics involves debates over what are the fundamental types of entities that make up reality. Now, when people talk about stuff making up reality, they often talk about properties, not in terms of things that one owns, like real estate, but in this context it means property in terms of being a quality, such as being square or being red. You can think of like an apple. It has many qualities, red, assuming it's a red apple. It can also be green, other colors, and has a particular shape, mass, density, and volume. Now, one thing we note is, even though we can encounter like an apple just by itself, we can run into apples in the store, we don't encounter their properties like red just by itself. I mean, yeah, you can peel an apple and have red apple skin, but you can't pull away the red as far as we know. Which is why philosophers often embrace the notion of what's called a substance, something we talked about, earlier. One way to define substance is that it's an entity that can exist independently, that it doesn't depend on other stuff. Now this can get really complicated, etc., but keeping it simple, go back to our apple. An apple can be there, by itself. You can imagine, a really boring world consisting entirely of an apple. But the qualities of the apple, like the redness, the mass, density, and volume, we think can't exist on their own. They can't just be, red by itself. They can be red things, but not red. There can be something that has mass, but not just like mass, drifting around by itself. So a substance would be one of these things that can exist on its own. Now, since I've been talking about properties, it certainly makes some sense to take a substance as also being something that holds, supports, has, bears, whatever phrase you want to use, properties. Now in this role, this substance is often called not substance, but substrata. The idea being that it's a strata, beneath something that holds it up. I usually use the analogy of Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head. Think of the potato thing as the substrata, and the pieces that get stuck into it as the properties. And this, of course, gets into all kinds of weird philosophical stuff, which we'll see in the future. Now, when it comes to substances, philosophers tend to accept that there are, two broad categories, although they debate about this because philosophers debate about everything. One is what's called material substance, bodies, physical objects, what makes up physical objects. Material substance is supposed to be three-dimensional, that is to say extended. It's supposed to be located in space, and of course it's physical, matter. Immaterial substance, sometimes referred to as mind, spirit, or soul, is non-physical. It's supposed to be non-extended, so it doesn't extend outward, and it's often taken as not being in space, but maybe in time. Now suppose you accept both of these, material stuff and ghosty stuff. In that case, you'd be a dualist. Not dualist in the sense of pistols at dawn, but in the sense that there are two basic ontological kinds, namely material substance, or material properties, and the other would be, of course, mental substance, immaterial stuff, or mental properties. And that's a view held by our good dead friend Descartes, and one of the classic forms of dualism is what's called Cartesian dualism, named after him, of course. Dualism is also quite popular with religious thinkers. Most forms of monotheism involve accepting that people are souls that have bodies. Now, what about those who like the mental stuff but don't want the physical? Well, they would embrace what is called idealism, sometimes known as immaterialism, sometimes known as phenomenology. This is a view that all that exists is mind, immaterial stuff. An example would be, of course, the tree guy. Everyone's heard the question, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? And George Berkeley, his view was, yes, it does, because God's there to hear it. And his view was that everything is mental. Now, at this point, you might be saying, why, that's really stupid. That's easy to refute, because you look around, and there are sandwiches and trees and houses and so forth, all kinds of what we call physical objects. And so you might just say, boy, that's dumb. How did anybody ever think that? Well, Berkeley explicitly addresses that. Because if the view was there's no, stuff, then yeah, that would seem to be pretty obviously false. So his claim is not that there are no trees or sandwiches or apples or planets or stars. His claim is, though, there's no material, physical substance. It's a metaphysical claim that, the apple that you're eating is not made up of metaphysical, physical substance. What is it then? Well, this will sound pretty crazy. The idea is that all these things are ideas. An apple is an idea, the sandwich is an idea, and it's all ideas. And if you want to see more of Berkeley, we talk about him in the metaphysics class, also the epistemology class, and his view of how everything is just in the mind. Now, suppose you just want one type of substance, but you think idealism is crazy. Well, in that case, you'd want to embrace what's probably the most popular view in philosophy these days, which is referred to as materialism and sometimes as physicalism. Physicalism is probably the better name because materialism implies also, in informal usage, someone who likes, fancy, expensive stuff. Likes material things, fine cars, or just like money and stuff. And physicalism makes it clearer, namely that it's a person who believes it's all physical. So a person who thinks that all of reality is just matter, there's no ghosty immaterial substance, would be a physicalist. And again, it's probably the most popular view. Now, finishing up, philosophers also, when talking about the problem of universals, they also talk about, as key to the problem, particulars and universals. Now, particulars are something we experience every day. In fact, I'm a particular, you're a particular. Pretty much everyone's a particular. And this means that we can exist entirely only at one point in space at a given time. Now, this doesn't mean that, that something can't be split up. So if someone were to say, aha, I can disprove that, think of a pizza. You can cut a pizza in different slices. The pizza is all around the room. It's existing in different places. And yeah, you can take objects and break them up, but being a particular doesn't mean that a thing can't be broken up into parts and the parts scattered around. It means that the whole entity can only exist at one location at one time. Yeah, obviously it can be broken up, becoming multiple things. If you cut up a pizza, the slices can be in different places because it's not one pizza anymore. And of course, something that's big can occupy, a fair amount of area. But the idea is essentially that a thing can only be in one place at a time entirely. Yeah, of course, someone could do something, clever, I guess. I could go to the Florida-Georgia border, stand there, so I'm half in Georgia and half in Florida. But that's a legal location. I'm not metaphysically, multiply located. So particulars are limited. They can only exist one place at a time. Now, as you might be guessing, universals can do something rather different from that. You can think of them as having a superpower. What is their power? Well, they are capable of multiple location. And again, this is not that they break up into different pieces. So they're not there's some superheroes and supervillains that have kind of a lame power where they can kind of break up into separate clones. I guess technically that is a superpower, but not super. But universals don't work like that. It's not that they split up and have, clones of themselves running around. It's that they're, in a way, I kind of think of as being, magical, because it seems so weird. They can exist entirely different points at the same time. So one way to make sense of this is think of like a color, like red. And there can be red red all over the place. Now, it's not claiming that there can be, lots of red objects. It's claiming that the red for each of the objects is exactly the same entity, that somehow it exists in all of these different places. And again, it's not like taking a can of paint and saying, look, I'm painting different things and they're all red. It'd be like having a magical paint where you just have, one drop of paint that can be everywhere. So you could paint the whole world. And so this multiple location stuff is super weird, which leads to one of the core criticisms of, these universals. Which segues nicely into the question of, how do you do metaphysics? How do you do metaphysical battles? So next, we'll take a look at doing metaphysics.